Hey, what's going on, guys? Archer and Mark here. I'm back with another video for you. And this is episode number 3 of my comic book stories little sub-series of videos that I've been doing lately. And quick little shout out to Dan, also known as RF Biker Scout, which he made a comment on the last episode, which in part inspired me to do this episode. I had a bit of an idea on what one of the episodes was going to be in this series, and he had a question for me about my comic book collection, which led to this. So again, to Dan, RF Biker Scout, thanks for the comment, and that comment led to, in partially at least, to this video. So little shout out there to him, and the link to his channel, if you want to check him out, will be in the description below. So definitely check out his videos. Got some really great stuff on there. So now, without further ado, I give you G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. This is the very first issue of the 1980s Marvel G.I. Joe comic book series. I'm going to show you. Now, this was really the first. This isn't the first G.I. Joe comic book that I bought, but it was G.I. Joe that got me into comic books, and I'm going to go a little more detail on that story in a little bit. See here, Ultimate Weapon of Democracy, introducing America's sensational new Special Missions Force for the 80s. And see, it says here, first blockbuster issue, and it is a blockbuster issue. It's this might be maybe one of the best, first issues of a comic book series. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little, I don't know. But, I mean, look at the cover artwork. Look, you got the tank, you got all the troops around, all the guns and explosions going off. It's just a very dynamic, energetic comic book. And just great cover. And this would be, I would consider this my crown jewel of my comic book collection. Not Batman or Spider-Man or Captain America or anything like that. This would be, if I was going to pick an absolute favorite comic book of mine, this would be it. It's G.I. Joe that got me into comic books. Which, again, I'm going to go into more. When I show you the next issue, you'll get a little more of an idea. This, not only, it's the first issue, and it introduces all the characters. You can see on the cover we have Zap, Steeler, Grunt, Flash, Scarlet, and Stalker. And there are other characters to be introduced. What I like about this, again, the early issues of the G.I. Joe comic, along with the early toys, the early episodes of the G.I. Joe cartoon, which came a little bit after the comic. The comic book started first. It was just, the early stuff was just the better stuff. You had the vehicles looked more realistic looking, more like actual military vehicles, at least as far as the G.I. Joe stuff was concerned. And again, because it's so the early parts of the comic book series, like any comic book series, over the years characters get introduced and revamped and whatnot, and this introduces all the original Joes. I think it's about a dozen characters. Cobra, you have Cobra Commander and Baroness, and then just hordes of Cobra troopers. This you have all the early vehicles, the early characters that get introduced. There's lots of very popular G.I. Joe characters that aren't introduced until much later. Characters like Shipwreck and Flint, Lady J. They come much later. Duke, which is my favorite character, is not introduced until a little later into the series. Of course, another one of the original characters is Snake Eyes, which is one of the all-time popular characters in G.I. Joe ever, if not the popular character. He's right up there. He's probably right up there with probably Storm Shadow, which, they're both ninjas, and ninjas are cool. So anyway, but I just really love this comic book. It's a great story that deals with the G.I. Joes have to sneak in and get this woman. She's a very important kind of bureaucratic woman, but if Cobra forces her to talk, she knows things and secrets and things, and that could be very bad for the U.S. government and things she knows. So their task is to get her away from Cobra. And not only that, so you have that main mission, and it's real exciting. Lots of action, explosions. Again, you see all the basic vehicles, early vehicles, the Mobat tank, and the rapid fire motorcycle, and the Vamp Jeep, which is really cool. There's also a little mini story. After the main story, there's an extra story that deals with, you have Scarlet and Rock and Roll and Snake Eyes in a little separate mini story that has nothing to do with the main story that's in this comic book. And that's a great little sort of behind the scenes action. It deals with some nomads in the desert, and it's another villain, it's another enemy to fight besides Cobra in this little side story. And it's a great little story. So really cool. Growing up in the 80s, again, I loved G.I. Joe. So but this is it. This is what started all the first issue. Now I'm going to go a little bit into, I'm going to show you the second comic book that I want to show you, which has got a really cool cover on there as well. So you have Stalker and Snow Job and Quick Kick, again, characters that were introduced later on. This is issue number 61. Now this is the very first comic book that I ever bought. And this goes into the question RF Biker Scout asked me is, did I have a video talking about how I got into comic books? And I didn't realize, I think I've sort of mentioned it but in other videos in the past, but I've never gone fully into it. And basically, now, I was familiar with superheroes from the Super Friends cartoon, and there was a Spider-Man cartoon in the 80s that I grew up watching. But I was aware of comic books. I just never was into comic books. I knew the characters from the cartoons and whatnot, and superhero toys and things like that. Now I was into G.I. Joe. Like I said, I didn't even realize that there was a comic book when I first started watching the cartoon. I remember being in a Kmart with my parents, and my parents were like, you can come with us, but you're not getting anything. No, you're not getting any toys. But of course, I had my little thing that I like to do. I would like to go into the toy section, and I would look to see if I could find something that I wanted that was cheap enough that maybe I could talk them into. It's only $5, or it's only $6, something like that. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. So my parents went off to do whatever they had to do, and I headed towards the toy section. Before I got to the toy section, they had the book section, and the books and magazines and whatnot. And something caught my eye, and I went over there for some reason. And then something, I don't remember what the initial reason was, but then something else caught my eye, and there was a comic book spinner rack. And for some reason, I started looking through, and I see this comic book. This G.I. Joe comic book. And it's just like, whoa, there's a G.I. Joe comic book. I had no idea there was a comic book. The comic came before the cartoon. I was very into the cartoon. I loved the toys, all that stuff. Watched it every week. But I was like, oh my God, there's a G.I. Joe comic book. And then there was 2 issues. There was this, and then there's an issue called G.I. Joe Special Mission, which was sort of a sub-series that had come out, that was sort of came out alongside the regular run of G.I. Joe, the regular comic book series. I found that out later on. I didn't know what that meant at the time. So there was 2 comic books. This had the more interesting, exciting looking cover. So instead of the toy, I asked for this comic book. And as you can see now, at the time, this was only $1. So $1 was very easy. It's like, okay, fine, I got this. What I didn't know was this was the beginning of a storyline where you had 4 G.I. Joes, these 3, and another character named Outback. And they go on sort of like an undercover, secret, very secretive kind of mission. And they get a little over their heads, and these 3 get captured. Outback, he's sort of was like lagging behind or something. It's been a while since I read this issue. And Stalker was the leader of the mission, so he says, somebody has to get out and get help and get our friends, so get the story out so they know what's going on and they can try and rescue us. And he says, now I'm the leader, so I have to stay. Snowjob and Quick Kick are injured in the story. So like they're injured, they're not gonna make it without some medical attention. And if we get captured, hopefully our captors will give them the medical attention that they need. And he says, well, I'm the leader, so I have to stay. So that means you have to go. And Outback goes off. And what I didn't realize is this storyline would span, I think it was like 7 or 8, maybe 9 different issues before it finally gets resolved, and you see them in prison camps, and eventually finally getting back to the G.I. Joes. And you know, they're in prison for a long time, and Outback gets, a lot of people think, you know, oh, he did the wrong thing, he abandoned his guys, but you know, he was ordered to by Stalker, who was in command of the mission. So I spent many times after that going to comic book stores looking for other G.I. Joe comic books, and specifically trying to get the other issues that followed up this story. And that's how I got into comic books. It all started with G.I. Joe. And eventually, in looking around, let's say if I didn't find issues of G.I. Joe that interest me or that I wanted, or I would start to look through the boxes with the Batman back issues, and Spider-Man back issues, and Superman, and so on. And little by little, I got into the superhero comics as well. So I started buying Batman and Superman and Captain America and various other characters. Of course, G.I. Joe, I kept buying those as I could. I've been on a little bit of a mission where I want to try and get every issue of this original 80s G.I. Joe comic book series. And I got this, there's only 155 issues, so it's like doable. I have about half of the issues at this point. So little by little, you know, I have a list of what issues I have and don't have. So the little by little, I dwindle the list down. But eventually I want to have, so all the issues, and the issues of G.I. Joe Special Missions as well. But particularly the original 80s Marvel G.I. Joe comic book series. So that's a little comic book goal, if you will. So there you have it. So that is my episode 3 of my comic book stories. That is how I got into comic books. It all started with G.I. Joe, not with capes and cowls and superpowers, but with G.I. Joe. And, you know, so there you go. So again, thanks to RF Biker Scout for helping to inspire this video. And again, I hope you enjoyed it. Guys seem to be enjoying the first 2 pretty much. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. And so I'm going to let you go. And until my next video, as usual, if you comment, rate, subscribe. And until my next vid, I'll simply say, Yo Joe!